Project 1999 is an Everquest classic emulator that has been running for a little over 10 years. On October 25th, they will be starting a fresh server called Green Server that will follow the classic Everquest timeline from 1999 up to the first two expansions. This is a chance for those of you who missed out on the golden age of MMOs to see what all the hype and nostalgia is about. In this video, I'll be talking about what makes this game so special all these years later, even with the older graphics and client. You can check a description below for a timestamp table of contents if you want to skip around. Now, if you can get past the game's age, you'll be extremely surprised at the effect this game has on you, especially if you're the type of person who enjoys something like classic World of Warcraft more than modern World of Warcraft. When classic WoW released a couple months ago, I heard the same sentiments echoed repeatedly about why the game was better. Complaints about modern WoW are generally that the game isn't as social, characters are all gods, there's no real journey, the only good part of the game is the raiding. In short, modern WoW just feels like much less of an MMO than classic WoW. Now, if you take all the reasons that you like classic WoW more than retail WoW, the immersion, the difficulty, the journey, the emergent, unpredictable situations that you are thrust into, those same reasons are why you might like classic EverQuest even more than classic WoW. Classic WoW is, in essence, a sequel to EverQuest in which the difficulty was drastically lowered, leveling is faster, death penalties are reduced, the economy is more tightly controlled, and there are many quality of life features like mailboxes, auction houses, and flight points that were added to the game that made it more convenient but also reduced the number of reasons you might have to interact with other players. This makes the game more accessible and less punishing, a trend that continues with pretty much every WoW expansion until you have the modern version, which has very little interaction, immersion, or difficulty whatsoever. If you now imagine that process in reverse, a world that is more open, more punishing, more based on direct interactions with players, rather than navigating menus such as the auction house, you can start to imagine generally what it is like to play classic EverQuest. Let's go into detail on a few different systems, and I'll try to paint a picture of the old school magic that this game innovated, which has been almost entirely lost in today's MMO genre. Let's start with Immersion. Immersion is the thing that takes all your attention and puts it into the game. It's the thing that causes you to look at the time and suddenly realize you have no idea where the last 4 hours went. It's the thing that makes you forget how stressful your day was or what obligations you have tomorrow and instead holds you in the present moment. Classic EverQuest achieves a level of immersion that is rarely seen in today's game, and it does that in a number of ways. First, the combat. The pace of combat in Classic EQ is slow and deliberate. You're not just mowing down endless numbers of mobs one after the other without any real tactics. Each swing of your weapon feels impactful, each miss feels awful, and maybe your group is strong enough to simply overpower that caster, or maybe you need to carefully time your spell interrupts so that it doesn't blow up your healer. Crowd control spells are high impact, and a skilled player behind a class like Enchanter can single-handedly set the stage for success against a large pool that would otherwise be unmanageable, assuming the rest of your group targets properly and doesn't break your spells early. You're paying close attention to your health, the monster's health, your group members, your mana, and your surroundings. Bad positioning or an unfortunate patrol could mean the group wipes if people are not attentive and ready to respond as situations arise. And death has much harsher penalties than other games. You don't want to die ever. If you do, you lose 10% of your current level, and it's even possible to de-level. At higher levels, the Cleric class gets access to a Resurrection spell line that reduces experience lost, but you may not always have a Cleric around to do so. If you decide to play a Cleric, you may receive whispers from desperate players several zones away begging you to help them recover lost experience and offering you platinum pieces as a reward. You also leave behind a corpse when you die that has all your items, so if you die deep within a dungeon, you may need to rely on other players to help you get back to the spot where your belongings are waiting for you. This time around, you might need a rogue to help you by sneaking into a dangerous dungeon corridor and dragging your corpse back to a safe location. And similar to clerics with resurrection, if you yourself are a rogue, you might find other players offering you platinum to help them with their corpse recovery. Interdependence is huge in EverQuest. If you're a solo player, there are a few classes you can pick to be viable and mostly self-sustaining, so don't worry too much if this part doesn't interest you, but for most players, you're going to need to rely on groups for all sorts of things, not just recovering from death. Buffs in EverQuest are massive. In other games, a buff might increase your health or damage a little bit, and it's nice to have. In classic EQ, a buff or a debuff can fundamentally alter the difficulty of your encounters. For example, an enchanter with a mana regen buff can nearly double the efficiency of a group that is heavy with spellcasters, and a shaman with stat buffs or health regen buffs can double the efficiency of a group that's heavy with melee. Some classes have buffs that are so valuable, players will even offer to pay you for spending your precious mana to give them that advantage. At the end of each fight, you're going to need to recover. Your health and mana will not tick to full after 30 seconds like they might in other games. Healers will need to manage their mana carefully, and players who choose a race such as Troll with extra health regeneration will find immense value in the time that they save resting, although playing such a race will have downsides as well. The downtime in between fights creates an even greater sense of magnitude of combat, but also grants a reprieve from the intensity. 20 years later, our attention spans have gotten much shorter, and maybe some players will tab out while resting and start watching a YouTube video as they wait for their health, but other players will spontaneously start up a conversation with their group members, something they might not have had much of a reason or an opportunity to do in other games. That conversation might evolve into a friendship that continues next time you're looking for a good group. Good group mates are incredibly valuable, and you yourself can become quite sought after if you're a skilled player, or if you're just enjoyable to hang out with. You might find yourself being invited to rare spawns, or to particularly difficult yet rewarding dungeon rooms that a typical pickup group couldn't handle. After a few experiences like this, you might suddenly find yourself shocked to realize that the most fun you've had in an MMO in years was simply during the times when you're literally sitting around recovering, doing absolutely nothing, just because of hilarious and strange conversations you had with some randoms on the internet who ended up becoming some of your closest gaming friends years and years later. The other side of immersion in EverQuest comes from the world itself. Travel is long and dangerous, but it becomes significantly easier if you have friends with movement or teleport spells. There's an entire economy for druids and wizards, who are the only classes with group teleport. You can make incredible wealth simply traveling the world and assisting others in a journey to their next destination, and that could include players who are much higher or lower level than you. One of the great thrills of being like a level 30 wizard is when a level 50 player overtips you some ridiculous sum of gold for a simple teleport just because he's been playing the game longer and feels like being nice. Now, what was a small amount of money for him ends up being a huge amount of money for you, and now you can buy your entire next set of spell upgrade which you otherwise couldn't afford. Sometimes even throwing a simple run speed buff to someone who is passing by will result in them stopping and giving you a tip to show some appreciation for making whatever trip they're on that much easier. The game starts with 3 continents, and players starting in every corner of the world will have very meaningful reasons to travel, whether it's for trade, for leveling, or to meet up with friends. And if you decide to make one of these journeys at a lower level, you are going to have a very memorable trip ahead of you. The game has 13 races and 14 classes, offering much more variety than most other games. All 13 of these races have their own city, with humans having 2 cities, and each city has a really unique feel and identity to go along with it. Each city also has its own faction, along with many sub-factions that you might have to watch out for. If you go exploring down a dark alleyway into a shady part of town, you might suddenly end up in a necromancer guild which abruptly executes you for not being one of its members. Similarly, if you worship an evil god and you stumble across a paladin guild, you'll quickly find yourself being brought to justice. Journeys from one part of the world to another are not straightforward. The game has no mini-maps, so you'll have to learn to judge your surroundings with landmarks and coordinates. You might need to hire a guide to get from one side of a zone to the other. Some areas are open, endless plains that seem to go on forever. Other areas, like dungeons, might be a series of tightly packed tunnels in which a single wrong turn means you're now completely lost. You won't find dungeons that are straight start-to-finish line where it's clear where you're supposed to be going next. Instead, you'll get in the habit of practicing running back to the exit in case you need to make an escape. Dungeons are also not instanced, so you'll be able to hear nearby combat in another room or tunnel, and if players in that room die or flee, you better be ready to react to the train of monsters if it ends up coming in your direction. You'll even see people shouting in the zone chat for that area when a fight of theirs goes badly to warn other players that those monsters might be breaking free or might be running towards the exit as they chase that player and try to finish them off. You'll find it very rewarding to learn all the twists and turns when exploring a dangerous area, and you'll find it terrifying when it's time to move on to a new dungeon with even more danger, in which you're probably going to get lost just like you did when you explored the last one. Another extremely rewarding part of Classic EQ is the economy. Trade is completely player driven, there are no mailboxes and no auction houses, so players must actually meet each other in the game. In order to accomplish this, a player-run marketplace tends to spontaneously appear inside of a large tunnel in the East Common Lands, which just happens to be sort of a crossroads between many cities of both good and evil races. A trip to the East Commons tunnel will reveal hundreds of players of every race, class, and level sprawled across the mountain wall, advertising their wares at tunnel entrance or second torch or other landmarks around the area. Trade chat in East Common Lands will scroll so fast that it's impossible to keep up, so you'll be pausing chat frantically when the item that you've been looking for suddenly pops up at 20% below market price so that you can catch the name of the seller. Items are not soulbound or level restricted, with the exception of very high-end raid gear, so every time you get an upgrade, you also get the opportunity to sell your old piece. Some players will be impatient and undercut their competition so that they can quickly move on to the next area. Other players will sit at EC Tunnel all day long, ignoring combat completely, studying prices, buying low, selling high, and amassing huge fortunes so that they can buy some incredibly rare piece of gear that has only ever dropped a handful of times, or simply so they can collect expensive pieces of armor to sit around showing off to the tunnel entrance to the hundreds of players that happen to be passing by. There are other interesting parts of the economy, such as spell components. For example, the Necromancer class must consume bone chips in order to summon their skeleton pet. If the Necromancer is a higher level, he doesn't want to have to take the time to farm bone chips himself, so he'll pay lower level players to do it for him, since many areas have low level skeletons that newbies will be hunting anyways. There are also items such as orc belts, knoll ears, and other trophies that drop off low level monsters that can be either turned in for repeatable quest experience, or they can be sold to wealthier players who want to power through those early levels and value the experience over the money. Crafters have the opportunity to become incredibly wealthy as well, since crafting in Classic EQ is much more difficult and expensive than other games. Blacksmiths who can make bandit armor, tailors who can make nice containers, or jewelers who can make rings with bonus HP will make a fortune off of adventurers who seek these upgrades, since the game does not simply shower you with excess loot as you level up. One way or another, you'll have to work for each and every one of your pieces of gear, and you might come to value a level 20 ring in Classic EQ far more than a max level piece of gear in some other game. The economy, class interdependence, and overall difficulty foster what is possibly the most important part of any MMO, and something that is missing from many modern games: a sense of community. In other games, you will often feel like an endless name in a sea of self-interested, anonymous players with their own separate goals that largely ignore each other, and within those games, you have to go out of your way to have interactions that feel meaningful. Everyone is rushing to max level, and nobody is really immersed in the present challenge until they reach the absolute end game. In Classic Everquest, these interactions happen spontaneously and consistently everywhere you go. You can easily earn a reputation as a good or bad tank, or healer, or puller, or whatever. If you are generous or helpful, people will remember you. If you are obnoxious or lazy, people will remember you for that too. It's a very long journey to max level, and you will likely cross paths with people you've already grouped with many times in many different parts of the world along the way. You might not even care about reaching max level, since every step of your Classic EQ journey will be challenging and memorable. I had 5 or 6 characters that I played on the Project 1999 Blue server. They were all various levels facing various challenges, and none of them ever quite maxed out. but I never got the sense that I was missing out or that I needed to rush to get those characters ready for endgame, because I was already enjoying the game every step of the way. The satisfaction normally only available at endgame in other MMOs is available immediately in Classic EQ right from level 1. The game is just the right size that you will constantly run into people that you know, and you will also constantly run into people that you don't know. You have so many reasons to interact with players, either because you need something from them or because you happen to be in the same area, or maybe you're in a group and there's downtime and you feel like chatting. And all these things over time will start to gain you a sense of familiarity and belonging within the server at large, even though the world is huge and spread out. Some guilds will be deeply rooted communities of people who have been playing together for 10 or 20 years but will still welcome you aboard. Other guilds will be brand new projects set out by ambitious players who want to take a chance on something new. Of course, like everywhere else on the internet, Classic EQ will have its fair share of negative interactions as well, but overall, Project 99 community on Blue server, the original server, always impressed me with the overall quality of people that it seemed to attract. Now that I've given you my pitch about Classic EQ as a game, let me just say a few quick words about Project 1999 in particular. Project 1999 is completely run by volunteers and is free for anyone to play. All donations to the server go towards hardware and costs, and none of the developers take any kind of paycheck. For over 10 years, they have never charged fees for the game, for customer service, updates, expansions, or anything else. The project operates with permission of Daybreak, the company that owns the Everquest brand, so that means it's completely legal, it can be streamed on sites like Twitch, and they never have to worry about being sued or shut down or anything like that. These guys have done an exceptional job running Project 1999 Blue server for over a decade, and with the release of Green server, they are ramping up hardware to make sure everything runs smoothly for the thousands of players who want to relive one of the greatest games ever made. I hope that I have convinced you to try Project 1999 after watching this video, but even if it's not for you, consider donating to support the project at www.project1999.com. And if you do decide to play, feel free to come hang out with myself and others from the community as we stream the game, answer questions, and hang out starting October 25th. I'll put links to both my Twitch channel and Discord server in the description below. Thanks for watching.